And we are live. It should be live on on YouTube. I think that's where I got it sort of posted at right now. Um, welcome
That
back, Johnny. What's that?
I said that's new.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, it was going across the board. It was going
Uh-huh.
across the board on all the platforms at first, but I gotta upgrade my plan on the
Ah,
other platform I use. But um, so let me take my gum out. Welcome back, Johnny. Thank you for entertaining these conversations. Um, Uh, the last time we talked, we had a chance to get into your life story a little bit of your background. Um, we talked a little bit about divorce, even church hurt. I think the last time we talked, I think the last time I talked, if I don't recall, I think I mentioned we were going to talk about church hurt a little bit the next time we talk, which is an
yeah,
interesting topic because I've experienced it. A lot of people have experienced it. I continue to experience a little bit of it just because church is not perfect.
right.
And I don't think it's supposed to be, but I think that other churches do a lot better job uh facilitating healthy energy than others. And it should be taught across the board. I had a recent incident where I was vexed. I was questioning whether I wanted to come back.
Oh no.
I don't even want to say it out loud what happened, but it was like so. I go to a small church, and I'm not gonna get too much into it because you never know who's gonna watch this, and I don't want to offend anybody. But they
Right.
did something, and I talked with the pastor. We resolved it, and I think that was the bigger moral of the story. Not to blab too much on it, but just to recap, the last time we talked, you talked about your divorce, you talked about the church hurt. You also talked about your book. I'm going to give you an opportunity just to sort of like plug that in there because that is that's important when we talk about these things to make sure that we're giving flowers out to what people are doing. So
Yeah.
just briefly tell people who you are again and just let people know with the project and the book that you have out there that's out there in the internet space.
Yeah, so author, speaker, I have a book called Burned, Blocked, and Better Than Ever. And it is essentially just the memoir of my life in breaking away from blueprints that I was told, this is who you're supposed to be, this is how you're supposed to do things. And when you do that, this is what life will turn out for you. And no matter how much I tried and how much I followed all of those rules and blueprints and regulations, expectations, I still ended up miserable and um, in a lot of pain emotionally just because I didn't know who I was. I was trying to be everything to everyone else. So the book is just really just talking about what that was like to break out of that. And in doing so, pursuing a divorce and then intentional living. That's my big thing is I'm an advocate for intentional living. You get to decide who you want to be and then every day show up as that person. And it's hard because it feels like you're constantly being tested, but at the same point it's not necessarily a test, it's just affirmations of the kind of person that you want to be. So when you talk about being someone that's full, for me, I just want to be known as someone who's full of love and kindness. And you get tested on it. It was
Mhm.
one of my favorite movies is Evan Almighty, and where God comes
Oh
and
yeah,
yeah, he has to build the ark, and he's sitting there talking to the wife, and he says to her, he's like, when you pray for family to be closer, does God zap you with feelings of warmth and fuzziness, or does he provide opportunities for the families to get closer? And so
yeah.
every time I talk about like I want to be full of love and kindness, it's like I get presented with situations where it's like, all right, how am I going to show up in this? and,
Mhm.
and it's,
Yeah,
it
it
happens.
reminds me of a church, old fashioned church warning. It says, "Don't pray for patience because A, that's part of the program, and B, if you pray for patience, you are likely to get a whole lot of things put in front of you that's going to test your patience for sure."
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, so
Uh,
I'm even currently just working through it right now in my personal life, just being like, okay, love and kindness. I got to show up in love and kindness. And, sometimes I just want to throw it out. But, I think for me, that's where I get to talk about intentional living. These choices that you're making, being accountable, self awareness, emotional intelligence, self reflection. That's all so important. And that should be habits that we do every single day,
Yeah. Aside from your book, are you a consultant? Do you do coaching, consulting? Do you
Yeah.
want to speak to that a little bit?
So I do that with companies
Okay.
because I'm a therapist. By the time I'm a relationship and communication coach. But so people will be like, yeah, you can help me with my marriage. I'm like, no, you need therapy. Like you need to go find a therapist. I want to be someone that's at the beginning of the relationship where they're learning how to communicate, how to self-reflect, all that kind of stuff. But I work specifically with companies. My goal is to go in and help work with restaurant industry, particularly
Okay.
because we that's so many people's first jobs, and that restaurant industry can be, if you allow it, very toxic, and the turnover rate is almost 80%. So we
Mhm.
have this overwhelming problem right now with employee engagement
Mhm.
because their first job was so terrible, and it's like, okay, why aren't we setting a better foundation in these
Okay.
areas where you can work on culture, you can work on, what you're learning in this hospitality industry. So, yeah, I'm starting to do that. I'm working with a local community college here, and we're building a hospitality workforce development program where I can go in and teach the fundamentals of the service industry and what that looks like and why it's so important for these young Gen Z, people to really embrace what they're learning there. It's not just a pass through time. It's not a quick way to get cash. It is, but what you're going to learn from it is phenomenal. It will carry you through. So that's what I do.
This is a nice segue into what we were talking about earlier a little bit. So
Mhm.
I want to bleed in. I want to put a magnifying glass on it, see where the bridges is a little bit. Talk about hospitality, the hospitality service, and what that entails from a training perspective. Like, what do you teach as it relates to hospitality? Give us your secret. Give us your magic sauce here. What's there?
Well, the thing that I love about hospitality is you're learning so many communication skills and you're learning conflict resolution skills. You're learning how to upsell. You're learning all of these things all in one little spot. Like as a server or as a back server, you're learning how to take care of the people on your team. You're learning how to, when a customer is very picky, or, there was one, I was a manager and she was yelling at me on the phone for 10 minutes. I must have told her, I was like, ma'am, please stop yelling at me. Please stop yelling at me. I must have said it like, I think they counted like 12 times. And the staff is watching me as I'm trying to, you know, bring the situation into something productive. Whereas
Mhm.
we're so used to being like, all right, I'm just walking away from you. You can't in the hospitality industry because there is the idea that the customer is always right, but at the same time, there's this boundary. You don't get to talk to me like that. And
Mhm.
so, how to set appropriate boundaries, how to do it in a way that isn't diminishing that woman's, herself, she's frustrated about. You learn these skills in that moment, and it will help you. It will help you with the future when you're arguing with your kids or when you're arguing with your spouse or your parents, learning to go, okay, you don't get to talk to me like that. Like there are just so many ways that you can learn things in the hospitality industry. You can learn how to work with other servers who are very isolated and islands, and how do you help them? How do you know remind them, I'm here to help you. What do you need? How do you see outside of your own like scope and be like, oh, this person is struggling, let me help you. Like there's just so many skills you learn in the hospitality industry.
Okay. What is the epitome? Give me like the top three things that a person should master within the hospitality industry in order to be good in that industry.
Emotional regulation,
Okay.
I think. Yeah, because you get everyone from guests yelling at you to chefs yelling at you to your coworkers yelling at you. So the emotional regulation that you need to exhibit is a sign of one, maturity. You're
Okay.
able to just like, I can do this. And so there's that. So I would say that would be the top one. I think
Mhm.
the next one on that would be just your presence, when
Okay.
you're on the floor and your presence, and understand that, sometimes you just need to leave shit at the door. Like, the drama that wants to follow you in, if you bring that to your table, if you bring that to your guests, if you bring that to your team,
Hmm.
your entire presence completely diminishes, and it changes the experience for everyone that you come in contact with. So emotional regulation, presence, and then I think the the biggest like professional one that you can take away from it is learning how to upsell. I think it just really helps you, like in
Okay.
any, like learning how to be proactive in selling something helps everybody. You sell your services if you're, an entrepreneur. You sell services as attorneys or salespeople, like learning how to sell, I think is one of the top three things in the hospitality industry.
Okay. Um, I
I don't
would,
know.
I would, I, yeah. I'm thinking of one that is the most irritant one for me.
Which,
Every time I go to a McDonald's is the worst one. They're the worst at it, and that not that they're a restaurant per se, but they are sort of part of the restaurant industry, right? Fast food. Uh, I hate when there's terrible somebody makes a mistake or there's terrible customer service, and I hate the lack of accountability and the lack of um of action towards accountability to make the customer happy.
mm-hmm.
I think Chick-fil-A is masterful at it, but there's a reason why. There's
Yeah.
a reason why I think their training comes from what was it? They have this training that comes from like hightail restaurant hotel. I forget the type of training. I was talking about it with another host. I think they were telling me about it. But anyways, um, so account for me hospitality. If you don't have that, because people are going to make mistakes, companies are going to make mistakes. If you don't have accountability and knowing how to, probably going toward the first thing that you were talking about, but just a little bit in reverse, a little bit,
Yeah.
or a little twist on it. If you don't understand that you're going to make mistakes or there's going to be imperfect interactions,
Mm-hmm.
how to recover from those situations, right, and how
Yeah.
to mitigate and problem solve those situations appropriately,
Mm-hmm.
which includes accountability. But that's a huge sting point there for me. Anyways,
Well, and
so
I think for me, I would include that in like the first thing that I said, the emotional
yeah,
regulation, because, people, they are so scared of accountability. They're so
hmm,
scared of what that looks like. And it's not a big deal, guys. Like, fix your mistake and go on,
right,
and so that is that emotional regulation, that it's like, all right, like shit happens. Like, if something happens, you made a mistake, you wrote something down wrong, figure it out, because I see it happen on the floor, specifically like in the restaurants. They'll be just so upset, just like, oh my gosh, I can't, the world is falling, and I'm like, it's fine, click, 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 here we go. Like, we fixed the problem,
yeah,
let's move on, and yeah, some people get really defensive, some people get over the world is falling apart, and yeah, so I understand what you're saying.
yeah. The emotional regulation also makes me think of uh, the mental health aspect of it, mindfulness. I've got a mantra: I am not my emotions. This
Mm,
this healthy separation, that we don't have to consume ourselves with an emotion. We
yeah.
can we are a sea of emotions. We don't have to identify always with the negative emotion or unwanted emotion that takes place. So understanding that our emotions are tools and not something that reactionary um components of ourselves, but they are
Yeah.
tools, and we have to ask ourselves, is that tool actually going to work for me, or is it working for me right now in the
Hmm.
moment? So good stuff.
Yeah.
Um, you know, um, we talk about hospitality in the restaurant business, and there, my brain automatically segued to church hurt conversation that we had because the church probably could learn a lot more from you even than the restaurants. My personal opinion, with regards to how to facilitate energy, how to deal with things go south.
Yeah.
Let's recap the conversation. You got a divorce, and the church handled it the way traditional church handles it. They sit people down or whatever. But your situation is probably a little bit more uncomfortable. Can you describe what went right and what went wrong with regards to how the church handled your situation?
Um, Honestly, the church handled it terribly. And
Okay.
they just but there were two different church aspects. There was
Mhm.
the church aspect where we were living in his hometown, and we had gone back to his home church, and we
Mhm.
were a part of that. We were pastoring there, and that
Mhm.
was, as youth and young adult pastors, everyone, our lives are so very private until it's not. And so as soon as they found out, there were like obviously prayer meetings happening, and then everyone just automatically assumed that I was in the wrong because,
Mhm.
there was sin in my life, there was all this stuff going on, and it just wasn't. That wasn't the case. And so there were two different aspects of the church. The one that we had spent all of this time being a pastor a part of, and I prayed with all of these people. I knew their secrets because as a pastor, you're hearing their stories, you're talking to them, praying for them. And none of them reached out to me. I didn't hear from a single person. They all literally just like scattered. It was just
Mhm.
like they left. All the friends that I thought I had, all the prayer women that we would go get coffees and talk, they're all gone, and they completely abandoned me. And they just continued the narrative that Johnny's in the wrong, Johnny's doing this, there's something wrong with Johnny, she's going to hell in a handbasket now, like just all of this kind of stuff. But the other church aspect was the church that we had started out in, where we were both students at, we were trained in. When I went to them and went and worshipped there, had church service, they all kind of like how are things going, and I would mention what was happening, and none of them were surprised. All of them were just like, well, we're surprised you lasted as long as you did. It was 15 years, because they knew who he was. So they weren't looking at the expectations of who I was supposed to be. They were looking at the realization of what I was living through because they knew who he was. They knew, they had witnessed, they had conversations to sit him down and try to talk to him about his issues. And so it went both ways. There were both experiences. And I definitely lean more towards the way that the other church handled it, just, being embracing and welcoming, and hugged me and, did what they could. They were like 4 hours away, so it wasn't like they could show up all the time, but if I needed them and I called them, they answered, whereas the other church didn't. So
So, but at least there was something in place. There was some support in place. It just didn't come from the church that you guys were at. And how long were you guys at that church?
the one with at his hometown, we were
Mhm.
there. We got there in 2006, and we stayed there until our divorce in 2000. Well, we left about a year earlier, so we were there 8 years.
8 years. You were youth pastors at position when the divorce happened. Nobody contacted you. Nobody consoled you.
A year.
Um,
Well, he had left a year before. He had gotten,
okay.
well, kind of fired. They gave him
Okay.
an opportunity to leave. Um, so yeah, that happened. Nobody contacted me. No.
Yeah. You know, when that happens, I've experienced that. It is a brutal experience to devote yourself to a system or organization,
Hmm.
and you hope that you get some return of all the stuff that you put into the ministry,
Yep.
into the people, into being devoted and consistent and committed, and to not get that in return. How does that make one feel? What is that? How does that affect Johnny? I know for me it was crippling, but We're two different individuals. How does that affect Johnny? Sorry.
No, honestly, I knew it was going to happen. And I like, I'm not someone, I try not to be someone that is like, okay, this is how you're going to behave. But I mean, I spent so much time in that church and recognizing and seeing how they treated other people that were
Hmm.
going issues. They were a church that swept things under the rug. There was sexual assault that was happening. They swept it under the rug. They just, that's who they were. They were bullies behind closed doors. So for me, it was less traumatizing, more just confirmations of what I think I would have been more shocked had they shown up. Like I would have been like, whoa, what's happening? And honestly, it was more reaffirming in the fact that when it comes to faith, when it comes to my relationship with God, when it comes to the kind of person I want to be, it's because I watch that religion get manipulated and used against people and that's where religious trauma comes from. It comes from the people. It doesn't come from God. It doesn't come from, he's not up there striking us down with lightning. It comes from people who take authority and hurt people with it. And I watched it, and so I was less upset that it happened the way that it did and more just confirmation of this is why I want to choose to live differently. This is why I want to be someone separate from the church, because the church is doing more damage than a person of faith is, if that makes sense.
Sort of, yeah. I believe in going to church. I believe
Mhm.
you have to find a church home, but I cringe when the place that you call home is corrupt, damaged, so
Yeah.
corrupt and damaged that you almost don't want to be there. Um, let's say you are being a consultant for churches, hospitality consultant for churches. How do
Hmm.
you think? I'm a pastor. I'm consulting you on how to better run my church through the unction of hospitality, which technically is a ministry. You know, that
Yeah.
is that is the core ministry. I don't if you're a pastor, you're listening to this. The core ministry of your church is hospitality. But the Bible says this is how you know that I am with. This is how people know that I am with you. That you have love for one another. So it
Yeah.
is the core element of ministry is the display of love amongst the people for one another.
Hmm.
I'm consulting you. What advice would you give me? What would you get advice would you give me on how to restructure my church or pay what to pay attention to make sure that there is a healthy level of hospitality, as we sell the gospel to people, as we try to get them to buy in to the gospel of Christ. How would you approach that? Riddle of curiosity.
I know. And like immediately I go through a whole bunch of layers. You know, starting with asking the question of how do you handle failure? And for me, it's not necessarily the answer that it's how people define the word failure. Is failure a characterization?
Mhm.
Like if is the sinner a failure? Is the sin the fail? Like for me, I would start with those questions of how do you see your role in taking care of people? Are you there to help lift them up? I think, and I put this in my book, the story of the woman caught in adultery. You know,
Mhm.
for me, obviously, as they want someone to throw stones, and then everyone walks away. What they don't talk about in the story, and I think is so important that we as a church should be doing, is who helped her get cleaned up, who put
Mhm.
a blanket around her.
Yeah.
We assume that she was naked and thrown in front of Jesus. Who that should have been the church.
Right.
Like that is what we're supposed to be doing. We leave it up to God to do the judging. We leave it up to Jesus to do the work inside of our hearts. Whereas we are supposed to be helping her get cleaned up. We're supposed to be covering her, checking in on her. Hey, how are you doing? What's going on? What choices are you making? How can you received all of this grace? How can we keep building on that? That is where I would start those conversations with a pastor is, what would you do in that situation? Would you walk away because you didn't have the ability to throw the first stone, or would you provide care? Because in her moment of failure, in her moment of sin and in her moment of vulnerability, what role would you have picked? What would you have done? And I think that is where we start the conversation of real hospitality.
Mm. You were talking, and I was thinking of the church being the hospital. That's not an unfamiliar concept.
Mm.
And I was thinking of all the roles in the hospital, and how does that parallel? How does that parallel to the ministry, right? Like who are the
Yep.
doctors of the church system? Who are the doctors of the church system? Who are the nurses? Who are the RNs of the church system? And when somebody is sick, when somebody comes in looking for healing, when families come in looking for healing and support, and when they make mistakes along the way, how do we provide a level of care and service that helps people repair in the church,
Right.
even when they are making mistakes in the church, while they are making life mistakes throughout their journey in the church?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Let me throw that question to you. Who do you think? Who do you think would be the doctor if the church is the hospital? Who do you think would be the doctor? It's probably the obvious. It's probably the obvious answer.
Well, I think the obvious. I don't know. Honestly, I mean, are we taking God out of this where we're just talking
No,
about the church?
let's keep it in the context. I mean, we definitely don't want to leave God out of it. Oh Lord, I'm like cross my we do
I'm
cross
out.
about this. Yeah.
Out of this conversation.
Um,
I don't know where they're going with it.
yeah.
There's I think part of my, like, I have to take the lens off because I have worked in a hospital and there are times that I was like, I think the nurses know more than the doctors. It's like, where are we with that at? Yeah, so I have to take that lens off and reevaluate that. I don't know. Honestly, I think the ultimate doctor is, our Lord and Savior, but he equips, and the Holy Spirit and all of those things are part of what, I don't know. That is a really tough question.
Let me give an assist. I think you're right. God is the ultimate doctor. I mean, he's the doctor of the doctors, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think the nurses. I think in a traditional, what's supposed to happen is the nurses are not supposed to know more than the doctors, but they do.
Yeah.
Nurses are probably the role of the pastor, I would imagine, with regards to helping nurse individuals. I think it's probably the overall ministry is
Yeah.
really nursing. But then you have RNs, people who play lesser roles, which are the auxiliary, which would be the auxiliary. They help do the heavy lifting, the dirty. The RNs and everybody. They do the dirty work, man. They
Yeah.
go in, they change people's beddings and all that. All yeah.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Sure.
I would call it the auxiliary of the church, the deacons, the ushers, those who play a secondary roles to the or supportive roles to the overall ministry in
Mhm.
general. Probably that's how I probably roll with that. I don't know how far I want to go down this rabbit hole
I
because
know that was a rabbit hole.
there's some
I'm right
treachery,
with you.
borderline step on a landmine here, going too far with this. But and I do think there's a remnant of energy there that is relevant with regards to you know how do we help, how do we make sure that people don't get damaged in the church,
Yeah.
and how do what can we do to prevent that, and how do we train auxiliary all the way from the pastor to the ministers to the supportive staff on what to be careful for when interacting with and dealing with life circumstances, especially those life circumstances that impact families in a major way, like divorce. But there are other things like death and all those things, family drama, signs of abuse that may be relevant in the church. Like
Mhm.
when you look at the larger church as a whole, abuse becomes a major issue
Yeah.
when you understand that the larger the picture, the more likelihood those things are taking place on a larger scale. So um I don't know where I'm going specifically with that, but just to go back to the original question, I guess, is okay, what will be a blueprint on your end there? Somebody who's a hospitality expert on how to help navigate a pastor through that space. Let me throw that question back at you based off of what's present in front of us.
I think the the way that we talked about accountability, I think there has to be personal accountability right out the door. Like we have to understand just because we're in that position of pastoring, it doesn't make us more or better or anything like that. There has to be a
Mhm.
level of accountability, that we recognize that we are just as flawed in every way.
Amen.
We just are. We're not perfect. And, I've seen way too many pastors get stuck on their
Mhm.
reputation being good and, honorable and all of those like fluff words. But we're just as human. And the moment that we stop thinking we are, the moment that we become vulnerable to making mistakes and not taking the care that we're supposed to take when we're dealing with people's lives and their heartaches and their hurts. I think that accountability is number one, 100%. And then I also think leave judgment at the door. You don't get to
Mhm.
judge anybody's how they process, because we all process things so differently. We all see things so differently. Our life experiences have lenses, have colored how we see things, and you need to leave judgment at the door. You need to leave, like when you're listening to someone pour their heart out, one, that is a sacred moment. We should be handling that with so much care, so much honor, so much like just sacred moment between two people where they're sharing their life with you. One, hold it there, but then leave judgment at the door. There's no room for, well, I would have done this. Like no,
Mhm.
that can't. That again, when you start thinking like that, you start putting yourself above someone else. And I don't care your title. The whole point is you're all here to help people,
Mhm.
whatever that looks like, whether you greet at the door, whether you're on stage and preaching, we're all here to help people. And our roles, I know that there were some ushers who knew the word of God better than I did. you
Right.
know, just because I have the title doesn't mean I'm above anyone else. And I think that that is something that, well, I know when I was pastoring, people would lose focus on.
Yeah, the Bible said the least shall be the greatest, and I think so. I think that gets missed along the way with a
Mhm.
lot of people. Um, and because you know having titles in the church, there's a level of respect and dignity, a certain level of dignity and a little bit of grandeur that comes along with somebody calling you deacon or minister or pastor, you know.
Yeah.
Um, remember when I used to teach, I used to do adjunct teaching at the university, and I had never been called, I had never been called professor before, or Mr. Jackson, or even Dr. Jackson. Like, first of all, I'm not a doctor, but boy, did it feel good to be called that name though, Dr. Jackson. Like, oh my gosh.
Yep.
So when very hard, very even harder when you make a mistake. And maybe that's something I want to ask, even bring into the experience when you are put on that pedestal and then you make a mistake. How hard is it to even talk about it or flesh it out, or have open dialogue about it, or not try to hide that, because there is this you run the risk of losing that respect that we so crave, because we've earned it somehow through our devotion and through our, that when you get promoted, somebody says you're gonna be this, there's a certain level of I don't know what you want to call it, but this idea that I've done enough to get this title, and now I go all the way down to the bottom. Does that did you get that feeling? Maybe you didn't get that feeling. I know I got that feeling. I was like, boy, I am down way at the bottom here. Now that I'm experiencing this, what what's your experience when when that going through the rank, because you go up through the ranks, you get these titles, and then experiencing that, how does one process that with the church? So maybe let's speak to that person who's made a mistake and that's in high position. How do they adequately deal with that through the unction of an imperfect church?
Okay. Um,
How did you
I
deal with
yeah, I I think the problem for me, and specifically in that, was I was, and maybe I just prejudged, but it ended up happening this way. But I decided when I knew that that was going to happen, when I
it?
knew that I had to be prepared for it, what I chose to lean into was the little gifts of love that God gave me along the way. And I held on to those so that I didn't feel like I was drowning in failure,
Mhm,
because
mhm,
the failure was the judgment, or, the being held accountable to those kind of things, yes, was all part of the process and needed to happen. I knew that as I was going to get a divorce, that I'd be having conversations with, students that I had pastored. Like, they would want to know, like, why would you make this choice? Like, what happened? And I had to do all that pre-work to start.
mhm,
So when,
okay.
as before, but that's part of that accountability, knowing that what the choice that I was going to make is often looked at as a bad choice. Divorce, people talk about it, you're not supposed to get divorced. So I
Mhm,
knew that I was making a choice that some people were going to support, and some people were going to say that, well, I no longer respect you. Fair
mhm,
enough. Okay, I get that. And so I had to do the pre-work in there, going, honestly, yes, this is a choice that I have to be accountable for, and I will be accountable for. But this is a result of choices I made when I was 20 years old and I got married and I shouldn't have, if that makes sense. So I knew I was fixing a mistake that I had already made, but it was, instead of me like feeling the guilt and the weight of it and the shame, I said, I already made a mistake, and yes, it looks like it's piling on, but I'm trying to right a wrong, if that makes sense. Um,
mhm,
so for me, I had to do all that pre-work. Now I ran into a situation where one of our administrative people at the hospital, no, at the church, she worked as a secretary to one of the pastors. She ended up, during our time while we were pastoring, she ended up having an affair with one of the youth students,
mhm,
and she and I worked with her for years afterwards, going through, and yeah, she felt the shame, she felt the guilt, she felt the dismay of just being up in this role and then having lost all of it in one moment that was, but it wasn't always one moment, it was constant little moments that she justified
mhm.
to, and then it exploded, and everyone, and that's the problem, is you justify all of these things and unwilling to accept responsibility until it's forced upon you, and that's where you get knocked off that pedestal. I don't know if I'm answering the question right. Like, I feel
No,
like
well, you're talking about the process of recovery, and I like the language of a little bit of precursor conversations with yourself as it relates to how to deal with it.
yeah.
I'm a little bit curious about, like, my big question is well, if I make a mistake, or if something happens where I know I'm going to get a divorce, is that something that I talk about with my pastor? Like, would you recommend a person in a high ranking position or in auxiliary? What's the steps to them sort of figuring out their place in an imperfect church system? How do they deal with that? Do they keep it to themselves? Do they have an open conversation with their pastor or trusted one, knowing that there might be knowing that there might be repercussions
Mhm.
that they may not want?
I think so. I don't think anything in secret, and I'm a big, I really had that like nailed into me when I was a child. Everything in secret comes to light eventually,
Mhm.
it just does. So I would rather start that conversation, me personally, so
Mhm.
that I can work. It's not such a big shock. And actually, my ex-husband and I, before we left, we started out in Rockford, Illinois,
Mhm.
and it was bad. The relationship was bad, and we were in Phoenix, Arizona with the ministry staff, and we told our head pastor in charge of our area, the youth pastor, and we told him, we're like, we need to talk because our marriage is really bad at this moment.
Mhm.
And he, even though he knew, he was still shocked to have the conversation. And I mean, don't get me wrong, we ended up staying together for 8 more years after that. But we constantly tried that, having those conversations. And it's not that they didn't know how to properly respond. There was no real answer that they could give, if that makes sense. Like, yes, it was us being accountable. Yes, it was us sharing what was going on. Yes, it was us, you know, pulling back the curtain on, our what our issues were. And all of that honestly helped me. That really did, because I was like, I've tried. Like, I didn't just up and leave one day. I had tried and tried. I brought as many people as I could. Our first year of marriage, it was so bad. We sat down with our youth pastors and we're like, I'm ready to walk out. And, so I mean, I must have had that conversation so many times with the different leadership above us. And all that really did, it wasn't scary. I mean, it was scary, but it helped me prepare for when I finally made the decision. It just
Mhm.
really gave me the strength to be like, I didn't do this in secret. I didn't hide, and I didn't, like, I was as honest as I could be about the situation and the misery that we were in, and nobody had the answers to help. And so I'm making a choice for me now. That.
One of the things thought that I come to mind, I don't know why it's coming to me at the last minute, is would it be I would think that it'll probably be beneficial for individuals to seek out therapy because it provides that confidential space
Hmm.
as a preliminary. Of course, I'm a therapist, of course I would say, but I really wasn't even thinking about it until 2 seconds ago. But and ironically, it's one of the things. I usually end up having private conversations with people with religious backgrounds that don't want to expose. It's like the first step before I even have an open conversation with my pastor. Sometimes is I flesh it out in a private space where maybe I can mitigate the consequence of having an open dialogue with somebody who can't tell my secrets, who's not going to condemn me or punish me, for my stuff. And when I think about it, did you guys seek out therapy?
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
we were married for 15 years, and we did therapy for 8 of them.
Was it helpful at all? I mean, I don't know.
It was so sadly enough, it was helpful for me to leave. Really,
Right
really,
there. Help me get really conclusive there.
it
Right.
really, yeah, because at the end of it, 8 years of therapy, and I actually put it in the book, but our last therapy session, and she works specifically with pastors, because
Mm,
she understood, the how easy it is to hide this stuff, how
uh,
easy to
right.
like want to be worried about all this. So she works specifically with pastors. And at the end of it, she's trying to get him to accept some kind of ownership in the relationship. And he looks
Mm,
at her, he was like, 100% of our problems is Johnny's fault. This is
ah,
after 8 years. And she was like, really? 100%? He's, yeah. And she's like, come on, Chad. And he was like, okay, well, like 99.9%. And so it was like, at that point, I had done the work. We had done 8 years of counseling, therapy. I
mm,
was going in by myself. We were going in together. But he never went by himself. So
mm,
it was always me. It was either my fault. And then we'd come in and we'd work on it.
mm,
And so, yeah, all that therapy really just gave me the strength to be like, all right. And she ended up emailing me, and she was like, honestly, Johnny, I just don't, he is
mhm,
unreasonably unable to accept any responsibility. And she's like, I can continue to work with you, whatever steps you end up taking. And so, yeah, therapy was number one for us, because we had this huge blowout, and it was the first time he ever took a swing at me.
Mm.
And he threw a punch and hit the sliding glass door behind me, and it completely shattered. And
Mm.
so all of our friends and family, well, the two that knew what was going on, they were like, you guys need to get into therapy. And so that's when we started. And 8 years later, it's like, all right, I've done the work. I'm
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. That is um is a refreshing testimony to hear that you actually did the work. It wasn't like you just made some knee jerk decision. You put in the work, and when somebody's at where they're at, so sometimes people get forced into emotionally into a position where they're like, I had enough. Look, you think I'm the only problem, and you're not willing to grow with me.
Yeah.
Geez, what a rock and a hard place to be in. So
Mm-hmm.
but you are in this thriving stage. You've written your own book. You got a consulting business. um I'm gonna wrap it up here. How can people get in contact with you?
You can find me on my website, johnnywoods.com. It's all about my book, and then it has a little form there you can fill out, and it comes straight to my email. Or on my social media, it's author Johnny Woods, and I think I don't really only have Instagram and LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn too.
And that's Johnny, Joni, not John. All right.
Yes.
So I just want to make sure the individuals know, like, look at her name, read her name in the thing here, make sure you spell it that way, Johnny Wood. So, Johnny, it's been a pleasure. I find a little bit of kindred spirit in this one here, because I've experienced my own little set of church damage, and it is comforting to see somebody else's process through it, to see somebody come out on the end of it. We all come out with our set of scars, but to be able to walk in it with a positive mindset, I could definitely sense positive energy from you, resilient energy from you. That leads me to another question, but we ain't got time for that one there. So, but but definitely encouraging energy. Any last words for the audience? Somebody who has experienced church hurt, what would be a final commentary for them?
Um, Final comment is, well, if there's any churches who are willing to have that open conversation, come and I will come preach the thing. Like, I feel like that's a thing that churches should be doing, is inviting people to come talk about church hurt, but that's a
Hmm.
different topic for a
Oh
different
yeah,
thing. Um, you know, People are people. They just are. And you get to decide those scars on that you feel that you have, how you nurse them, how you display them, how you even look at them. I open my book with a story of how I got burned when I was 4 years old, and my father was very religious and didn't believe in the hospital. And so instead of taking me to the hospital, he ripped those blisters off my arm, and there's scabs now. They're just there. And I'm 46 years old and I still have them. And I can look at them and be really hurt and angry about them. But what I found over the years as I healed from, some man's religious fanaticness, I looked at it and I go, I want the ugliness of those scars to remind me that other people need to be loved, and that I can either cover them up and let that ugliness sit inside, or I can say, I'm going to use this as a way to love on other people, because people
yeah,
are people, you know, sometimes
yeah,
they just love.
yeah. There is purpose in our pain,
Mhm.
100%. Yeah, good stuff. All right, J- Johnny, nice to
Yeah.
meet you again.
Yes.
We can always have these conversations, if you're up for it. We'll try. We'll talk on the back end. I'm going to talk with everybody. We'll talk on the back end and see what's possible. Thank you for joining us today, and making time for it. I know you got kids on spring break. You had to switch some things around, so I appreciate you adjusting the time frame to meet the podcast. So, all right,
Thank
we'll talk to you later.
you.
All right,
Okay.
bye now.
Bye.